Hi, my name is Katie McKay, and welcome to our webinar called Building on Strengths with First Grade Writers. I work at the Heart of Texas Writing Project at the University of Texas in Austin, Texas, and as the co-director of the Heart of Texas Writing Project and also as a teacher consultant. And I'm here with Alice Sanderson. You want to introduce yourself, Alice?
Hi, I'm Alice Sanderson. I am a first grade teacher in Austin ISD. I just finished my 12th year teaching, and I've taught pre-K through second as well as special ed resource where I did reading and writing.
Alice and I got to know each other first from teaching at the same school, and then over the years also through our involvement with our Texas Writing Project. And one thing we've had the privilege of doing through Heart of Texas Writing Project is really learning from Randy and Catherine Bomer, both who are teachers of writing and authors of books about the teaching of writing. And this webinar is really building on another webinar that we did in this series called Noticing and Naming Strengths in First Grade Writers. And so the pieces of writing that we're looking at in this webinar are the same pieces that we looked at in Noticing and Naming Strengths. And so if you haven't watched that webinar, we would suggest that you first go back and watch that one, because what we're doing is we're following the steps that Catherine Bomer suggests that we have when we're having conferences with our young writers, with all our writers really, is to first put on a lens of looking at their writing for the strengths that are already there and trying to look past some of the things that might first glare at us because of the ways that we were taught to do writing or because of the pressures we feel of the things we still need to teach. But if we really concentrate on what's already there. So the practice of looking at what's already there is we concentrate on our other webinar, the Noticing and Naming Strengths. In this webinar, we'll still be looking at strengths, but thinking about how do we build on those strengths. So we'll start with this quote from Catherine's book. I'll just go ahead and read it. My purpose in this book is to demonstrate that student writers often perform remarkable feats in the craft of writing, from the macro level of content and organization to the micro level of sentences, images, and word choice, precisely because they are young, unpracticed writers. They haven't yet conformed to notions of conventional syntax or fixed and formulaic genre structures. So their writing sounds fresh and original, ahead of its time, avant-garde, you might even say, or you could even say. And so even when we're thinking about how we might help students build on those strengths, build on those, the things that we've noticed and named that they're already doing as authors, we can still think of their writing in that way, this fresh and original way. So as we move into this, looking back again at student writing to think about where we might go next with them, I always like to talk about how the noticing and the naming is not just, and this is another thing Catherine Bomer says in her book, it's not just about a pat on the back, good boy, good girl. It's not even just about buttering them up so that they'll hear what we really want to tell them that they need to fix. What it is it's showing them what they've done as a writer when they might not even know that they've done it, so that they can be even more intentional the next time they write, and so they can apply those things. And so when we talk about what we might teach them next, it's not just well, you did this really well, but this is what I want you to change. But instead, it's you did this really well, and another thing you can do related to that is this. So really building on it, not pushing one thing aside to mention another, but really thinking of a way to build on it, which can be challenging in the beginning. So that's why we do this practice of looking together at student writing. So these are all examples from Alice's room, and we'll start with this example. This is Lego Robin, and I had a label in our other one. I thought I had updated it, but regardless, we know this is Lego Robin. Alice had told us a little bit about who he is as an author in the last video. Do you want to just give us a quick synopsis of who he is as an author?
Yeah, this is a student who really struggles to get words on the page, but really works to express himself through illustrations. And Legos are incredibly important to him and very engaging. He's He's very passionate about Legos and knows a lot about, very knowledgeable as well. And so that's something he weaves into his writing quite a bit. And that's definitely, I think, the thing I would start from with him is, wow, I love how you chose something that you're so excited about, like Legos, and you chose to write about that.
Absolutely. And then, so, so that's one thing that he's doing as an author that we've already seen, is that he knows what he cares about and he chooses a topic that he cares about. He's not just guessing at what somebody else wants him to write about, but he's
Right.
very confident in going for what he's into. And so that's not an insignificant thing to tell him. That is something we want to point that out really explicitly, because we want him to continue to do that, especially somebody who might struggle to get their words on the page. We want them to know that what you're doing is what authors do. You're already acting as an author and an illustrator when you choose to write about something that you really care about. So I think noticing and naming that right away. Also, because I don't see words on the page yet, I would really concentrate on what I try to teach him to do, to be more to do with his picture, as opposed to the natural jerk reaction to try to get words on the page. And one thing we talked about in the last video was about the movement that we see here, that there's this circular motion that happened with his wheels, and that there's this vertical motion with the legs and with the arms, and a circular with the badge, and the accuracy of this helmet hair that he gave to the character here. And so one thing that I might think about is, I might tell him, I see a lot of movement in your drawing. And another way that authors and illustrators sometimes show movement in their drawings is to add lines to show if this bike is moving, that I might put 3 lines behind it to show that it could go forward. Or I could even have a few lines around the wheels, maybe with a thin tool like a pencil, that show that they go around and around, like a vroom vroom kind of thing. So that's one thing that maybe I could say to him in a conference. Where do you think you would go, Alice?
My first thought was to ask him, tell me about what's happening in this story, like just to get him talking about what's going on, and then through his talk, guide him to add those details into his illustration. So again, focusing on the illustration, not yet on the words on the page, but through him being able to tell me orally what's going on, talking about how we could then add that detail into the illustration.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And if you knew him as a teacher and you saw that he was ready to add some either labels with letters or words, then maybe incorporating them into the illustration as opposed to starting to get them on the lines.
Right.
Like just the name Robin or the R for Robin on his badge. It looks like he might have even tried to do it. I can't quite see, but he might have put a yellow R already in there. And if he did, then that could be something that he could go back over with a pencil just to make it even a little bit more clear so that we don't miss those details. Cool. So here is a piece about the author who is sliding at recess with her friends, and her friend accidentally pushed her. And what were some of the strengths that we talked about in this piece?
We talked about, again, the illustration and the perspective with the slide. You can really tell how tall the slide is, and you can tell the detail of the cage at the top of the slide that keeps you from falling off the very top of the slide, as well as the people who are around the slide doing other things on the playground, and you can tell the person falling off the slide. We talked about the colors, purple, green, and yellow being LSU colors, which are where the students' parents went to college. So those colors, she chooses those colors for lots of things. So those colors are important to her. And that shows up in her illustrations as well.
I had forgotten you had said that about the LSU colors. And I think that's probably where I would go with building on that strength. It's just such a great thing to know about her as a writer. And maybe talking about, now there is a girl over here in the pink, she looks like she's wearing pink. So it's possible she did that with other characters. So I might even ask her, you definitely thought about the colors that go on that you're wearing.
Mm-hmm.
does this person always wear pink, or what about this person over here? And so just talking to them about how when we write stories, whether it's in memoir or in fiction, we often have recurring likes and things that come up with our characters when we're developing our characters. And how might you develop these characters in this way? Besides just the one with the LSU, are you already doing that? And if not, how could you do that? Does someone always have a bow in her hair? Does she always have her ponytail to the side? Kind of that, making the characters even more recognizable from one story to the next. I also that just that word accidentally, it just stands out so much in there. So I would want to talk to her more about how important our word choice is, and how that one word really says so much about her piece. And when she chooses words like that, it really affects her writing overall, the tone.
Mm-hmm, definitely. Yeah, it definitely changes the tone to say accidentally versus I was pushed off the slide.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So here we have the lost at the grocery store, the student who was at HEB, and we talked about the humor in this and how there's this juxtaposed like fear that you must know the mom is having when she finds out her son is lost, next to this kind of potentially playful smile on the face of the character over here who might be the one who's lost. Where would you go next knowing this author?
Um, I would want him to tell me more about the details. So I think if I sat down next to him, I would say, man, you got lost in the grocery store. I see your mom was in the restroom. Could you tell me more about that? And I would just listen to see what he had to say. Because I feel like there's a lot more to that story that we could probably work on getting either into the illustration or into the writing, that I would be curious to know more about.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this student would be ready for that. He would be ready to add more words. Like he's in a place where that would be an appropriate place for him to go.
Where he could have done that.
Yeah.
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 He also did such a nice job with labeling with the HEB up here and the restroom over here, that one thing I think we could talk about is other ways to incorporate text into the picture. So
True.
even with like a thought bubble or a speech bubble. So adding more text to the page, maybe on the bottom, but also within the picture. So if we name the strength of, you did a really good job of incorporating text into your illustration. More
Yes.
ways or other ways that authors incorporate text into their illustration are to have speech bubbles or other labels or thought bubbles.
And he would definitely get excited about that as a writer. Like I could see you said that and I thought, oh yeah, he would definitely, that would excite him as an author.
Yeah, so I think
And I think
sometimes,
in ways it's sometimes less daunting to have a thought bubble than to have like multiple more sentences.
right,
Like it's
right.
less
So
daunting to think about like, oh, how else could I use that in my illustration?
yeah, and through doing what you said, is just listening to him, which I think is really the most powerful thing we can do in any conference, is just really intently listening to our students and repeating back to them what we hear. You'd probably find some of the language that could be incorporated into the drawing through that interaction as well. So I put this quote in here, just a famous Lucy Calkins quote of "Teach the writer, not the writing." That this quote really speaks to this idea of naming strengths and building on strengths. That it's the writer that we're teaching. What is the writer doing, and what could the writer do more of, or try out, and not just about what is this writing going to look like in the end. It's just so common for teachers to feel like, well, the piece just doesn't look perfect at the end, and so we need to keep working on it. But each piece is a learning opportunity for that writer, and a practice for them. And every piece has to be done at some point so we can move on and learn from the next one. And so I don't know, I just think it really connects with Catherine Bomer's idea. And she actually quotes this exact quote from Lucy Calkins in her book in Hidden Gems. So what were some of the strengths that we talked about with this writer?
We talked about we noticed the give and take of relationship in this one. So my friends like to do this. I like to do this. That back and forth relational piece of it. And I would definitely want to highlight that to this writer.
I'm almost wondering, because of how powerful that relational piece is that he's doing, the give and take that you're mentioning,
Uh-huh.
I wonder if like giving him another piece of paper that's even like just a plain white piece of paper and folding it into thirds and saying like let's expand on that theme a little bit more. This idea of like, what do you like to do? What do they like to do? And what do you all like to do together? I don't know. I'm just interested in exploring that more. It's just so interesting. There's 3 sentences in his piece,
Uh-huh.
and there's just such a clear um, give and take there that maybe exploring that a little bit further might be interesting to do with him. Again, of course, it would be a part of the conversation and just seeing if that's something that he's even open to or notices or understands that he did when we pointed it out. Um, I know, I bet he would. You know, when I think about my son and his friends, he's
Yeah.
he's like, I know that that my friend Nico likes the Ninjago Kai, and I know that Ulysses likes the Ninjago Cole or whatever. So
Yeah.
they know their friends' likes. They know what they're into, and they know the things that they do. Like you said, the ball game that these guys like to play together at recess.
Yeah.
So maybe just exploring that, even just through drawings.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's
Yeah.
probably where I'd
I
go with him
agree.
next. He might be another student who'd be interested in adding in some words into his picture as well. He has kind of a title over here to the side that says friends.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's already doing a little bit of it. We could point that out. And then we could even show him this piece of writing and
Uh-huh.
introduce him to someone nearby who has tried that out and say, you know,
Yeah.
another thing writers do is they not just put the title, but they can incorporate words into their text in other places. And that might be another entry point for him.
Yeah.
Let's look here at this was the getting lost at school,
Yes.
and um, and then we had said that this author, as a writer, was doing some really great, using some really great strategies about memoir.
Mm-hmm.
That there is sequential organization here already happening. There was some great character development
Uh-huh.
of the friends and how they were like patiently waiting for each other, or she was patiently waiting for a friend when she
Yeah.
got left behind. And then these more authoritarian, kind of like helpful adults arrive on the scene and help out the teacher and the principal who help her get back to her class. Um, so, so I'm wondering, like, where would I go next with somebody who's already, like doing such a nice job of components and characteristics of memoir.
I'm thinking. I think that I would I would like to, I would maybe ask her like, was there something the teacher said or when she found you or that the principal said? Like I feel like she would be ready to add that component of having, or even her friend who she was waiting for, just the component of another voice entering the story.
Mm-hmm. I think that could be a next natural step, definitely, because of how much she's already developing the characters. So what we could do is to say, you've developed your friend Sadie here. You've got the teacher and the principal, and then another thing that authors do to continue to develop their characters is sometimes they add some thinking or some talking in there. On a similar line, I was thinking about the feelings. There's definitely already the presence of
Yeah.
feelings here, but we could ask her to show a little bit more. Like, so while I was waiting for Sadie, a teacher found me and took me to the office. And so there could be a little bit more um, I don't know. She could expand on that a little bit more potentially about, was she feeling safe with that teacher? Was it like, was she disappointed? Was she worried? Oh, but I was waiting for Sadie. I can't leave, or she's going to be looking for
Yeah,
me.
and it's interesting to me because when she told me this story orally, there was definitely like I could tell she was very nervous when she got left behind on the playground. I don't feel like that really comes out in the written part of it. So maybe that would be a next step, would be nudging her to how can we, when you talk to me about this, I distinctly could tell you were nervous. Here are the ways I could tell. Your facial expression looked worried, and you were a little fidgety, and I could tell that was really scary. So how could we describe that on paper? That might be a place to go.
I think you're bringing up a really important point, that noticing and naming the strengths can also come from their oral composition, the talking that they're doing. When we get to first grade, and as you look through these webinars, you really see the progression of writing through pre-K, kinder, and first. And when we see them start getting words on the page, these can so quickly move away from the talking and drawing part of the development of writing. And anytime we can come back to talking to them about the importance of talking and writing, talking and drawing to develop their story and their strengths, that we don't have to just name the strengths that we see in the writing on the page, that there's strengths in storytelling orally as well that we can point out to them and build on. I'm glad you brought that up. So here we have India, the cows in India. So I'm trying to remember, what were some of the things that we pointed out?
We were talking about, that sense of humor with the banana peel, and how, it's very playful, feeding banana peels to cows alongside the road, and just the novelty and how that's different. That's something we wouldn't see here. So culturally, that's something that's different, and that really stuck out to the student. And just continuing to draw on that experience.
I think you're right. I like the word that you used there, novelty. I don't know if we'd used that one before, and I think that would be a great word to teach her, about the novelty of travel, and when you go someplace and the things that stand out to you and stick in your memory. Yeah, as far as building on that, I just love this piece. I saw cows walking on the street, and just the bewilderment of what's going on here. But then it's just like when you are in another country and something happens, and all of a sudden you're surprised by it and bewildered, but you're in it. You're a part of it now. You're not just seeing it from afar and wondering. You're actually giving banana peels to a cow, and it's been happening there. So I'm wondering, like, what I would say to her as far as building on that. And then I feed the cows banana peels. It just is such a great way to end that. It's just kind of like, I just did it. I fed these cows in the street. I think, I'm interested, because of what you told me that about this child, that her father is from India. I'm kind of wondering a little bit about the other people who are with her. Not that you would have to add that in, but it just, well, I don't know. Maybe I wouldn't even go that way, because I do like the relationship. It's like her and the cows kind of too.
Yeah, because I did think about that. Like, well, what were your mom and your dad and your brother doing? Because I know they were all there. Mm-hmm. And then when I conferenced with her about this piece, I did ask her to tell me more about, like, what else happened. And she was like, there were just cows, and we just fed them banana peels. So it was very, it very clearly stood out to her, but it was also just a very simplistic, joyful moment. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I like the simplicity and joyfulness of it. I don't want to take away from that at all by adding, like, what were you feeling? What were you thinking? Like, I don't want to overdo it.
Well, you know what I wonder? I read this travel book once called Culture Shock when I was moving over abroad, and I wanted a better idea of what things to expect. And even talking to her about how travel writers do that they kind of mix in anecdotes and memoir into nonfiction to engage the reader more and have them understand what the things they might expect. So maybe something that she could build on is even getting out a second piece of paper and talking about one other thing that happened that was kind of out of the ordinary that somebody might come across. So it could just be that she did such an effective job here of drawing us in and teaching us about something that was different. That maybe she could add a second page and almost make this into a travel book about culture shock.
I like that idea a lot, because I could definitely tell that, like, when I conferenced with her about this piece, she was like, well, that was it. And so I really like I could see that being able to get more out of her, and engaging her by making it more of a travel book.
Yeah. And of course, like, one thing I've said before, did a presentation about with Melody. You remember, Melody. We talked about how like easily praise can become persuasion, and so of course we want to like feel
Yeah.
her out, right? Like we could suggest this thing of like, do you have another thing you want to write about this? And if she's just like, it was just banana peels, like I'm done, not to force it on her, but I do think it's be worth bringing up as kind of a suggestion, or maybe not even a suggestion, but just like an idea, like I'm interested. Are you interested? Kind of thing.
Right.
Yeah. So here's another one of Catherine's beautiful quotes. She says, "Remember to relax, sit next to me, and let's journey together to find the beauty and brilliance that is there. Let's read them as if we care as persons." And the reason I wanted this quote in this webinar was because the second we turn to that, now I'm teaching them something. Okay, I've named it, I've noticed it, now I have something to teach. I feel like it's hard for us to maintain that I care about you as a person, as opposed to just, I'm your teacher now, and I have something that you need to learn from me. And so that it's so important for us to just maintain that conversation between writers in a conference, as opposed to, okay, now I'm going to switch on my teacherly voice and tell you that you need to make a travel book about India, but instead it just continues to be a conversation that the kids should really have a lot of control in and be making a lot of
Yeah.
in.
Yeah. And I think that definitely, if you set up that atmosphere and environment at the beginning of the year through building that community of writers where they feel comfortable and safe saying like, no, actually, that's not what I want to do with this piece. That gives them a huge sense of agency. Like that's something I really work on with my students is if I give you a suggestion and it's really not what you want to do with the piece, this isn't please the teacher. This is you growing as a writer.
Absolutely. I
think that can be a tricky dynamic.
Yeah. Yeah. Well said. This does not please the teacher. Growing as a writer. Nice. So here is, we need to put your quotes on here, Alice. So here's the Christmas day, and some of the things we liked about this was how he builds some suspense. There's no presents. He's got the ellipses here. Then goes into some humor. He kind of lightens it up. He kind of gives us some relief from the suspense, from the worry that we have about there being no presents when he has to laugh with a ho 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 and fall in the snow, and he couldn't get out.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm trying to think of what we could build on. So if he's got that suspense going and then he throws in the humor, he comes to definite close. They open the presents at the end.
Yeah.
I think maybe since he's got that humor down, I think I might encourage a little bit more of that humor. That like not overwhelming the piece and trying to make the whole thing funny, but the end feels a little bit too wrapped. It's a wrap for a pun there, just a neat package at the end.
Well, and I think it was like, I don't know where else to go. So they open the presents at the end.
And they open the presents. And so I think that's one thing I might say is you have such a good use of humor in your story, and as a person, clearly he's a funny guy.
Yeah.
That another thing authors can do is sometimes they can even end a piece with humor. Have you thought about how you ended your piece, and what do you want? Sometimes I ask kids, what do you want your reader to feel at the end of a story? And just maybe asking him that. Do you want to continue with this feeling of humor, or are you interested in going in another direction?
Yeah.
Because he does such an effective job of starting it and moving us along, that maybe talking about the ending in a little bit more detail would be a next step kind of thing.
Yeah, I agree. And I think going along with that, we worked a lot this year on thought shots and snapshots and exploding a moment in stories. And so I think the ending might be a good place for that. Like, like talking with him about could we add a thought shot here? Could we add a snapshot? Is there a way that we could add something humorous that's a quick thought that somebody's thinking or somebody says?
Kind of like the different ways, including humor, that we could end a story.
Right.
and what kind of feels the best for you for this ending.
Right.
Yeah, cool. I think we got about two more we're going to look at. This, I just smile when I see his face here camping. So he goes to camp and he has all these things that he loves to do while he's there. And one thing we pointed out was that there's a great kind of rhythm to his short sentences that gets us excited. And it almost feels like he could just go on and on listing all the fun things that he did. I mean, he does tie it up, but the way that he does these short sentences with those big periods there, just kind of saying like, I did this, punch. I did this, punch. I did this, punch. I played in a box. I loved it. The end. Um, we thought that rhythm really, really helped the piece. So maybe rhythm would be a way to build on it too.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
Um, we could even get out another book, like maybe a book if there's one that he likes to read, to look at how the sentence length varies. Because he has this repetitive short sentences, it might even be a chance for him to try out a longer sentence. So to say, these short sentences in succession are really effective right here for this rhythm. One thing you could think about for your ending is changing it up. Sometimes authors stick with a rhythm with their sentences and having them the same length, and then sometimes they change it up and they put in a longer sentence, or they change the sentence structure. You could surprise the reader at the end by having a longer sentence. Mm-hmm. That might be one way of just building on that idea of rhythm that he's already really playing with here. I went to camp. It was fun. I played on a tree. It was fun. I played in a pool. I played in a box. It was fun.
Yeah.
Even just that repetition of the line, it was fun.
Yeah.
Could be effective to add it again toward the end. Mm-hmm. Or changing the word fun, Anyway, I think maybe paying attention to that rhythm might be the best way to build on it.
I agree. I mean, I tend to, when students use vague words like fun, I tend to focus on like, well, what else could we say? But in this piece, I feel like I would want to point out that really serves a purpose here. Like, I did this. It was fun. Like, it's continuing to create that cadence. And I would want him to be able to see that there are times when we do that it's intentional.
I think that's a good point. So kind of what you just said, you do sometimes as a teacher, which I think is another thing we're trying to model here in this webinar, is our initial reaction, sometimes holding on to that and thinking about how can I look at this in another way? Mm-hmm. Because it's just like the word said, right? We often teach the kids, don't say the word said, change it up, blah, blah, blah. There's a lot of books where people just say said. I mean, it's just they don't want to distract from the story. Yeah. And sometimes by saying hollered out of nowhere just to change it up, it's more distracting than it is helpful. And mm-hmm. So, like you said, the fact that he used the word fun twice isn't necessarily an ineffective choice. It might be, like you said, the word cadence, another great word. It might be actually helping to create that cadence, the repetition of that word at the end of a sentence. So I think that's important for us to think about when we're conferring, is sometimes our initial reaction to something might be, if we were to make that suggestion, we might even be helping them to make their piece less effective in the end. Right. If we go with our initial gut reaction sometimes.
Well, and he might not have even been aware of the effectiveness of it is fun, but when I name it for him, it helps him build that awareness of, oh, authors intentionally make choices and I can intentionally choose to do this.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. So then Mr. Bear here at the end, our fiction story. So this is an author who wrote a 4-page fiction story. And some of the strengths, what were some of the strengths that we said we saw in this one?
We talked about his word choice was strong. We talked about him using the shrink ray, not only to shrink the size, but to kind of go back from being like a big adult Mr. Bear to a kid Norman Bear. Mm-hmm. So kind of not just changing size, but changing time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think,
Oh, and we also talked about friendship. Like what he did at one point, he doesn't know what to do because the shrink's very shrinking and he needs help. So he asks a friend.
oh, yes, we asked a friend. There's so many directions really that we could go
Yeah,
in. I think one theme that between some of those different things though is this idea of how, well, even when we're writing fiction, we want it to seem realistic. And so the fact that he changes the name to Norman Bear when it's a kid, or the
yeah,
fact that he goes to a friend when he needs help, those are all things that are realistic that we do in real life. And that fiction authors work really hard to make their stories seem real.
hmm,
They want you to feel like you really did step back in time with that person. They want you to feel like you really did find a shrink ray. They, they want you to know that it's not real, or but that you think that it could have happened. And so
hmm,
maybe talking to him about how he's doing that really well. He's going back and forth between this really outlandish, incredible thing and these really realistic
yeah,
um, touches. And so maybe he could go back and reread and find more places where he could either add something more unrealistic, more fantasy, more incredible, and then other places where he might want to be really just plain and realistic, like looking under a bed. Like what if he were under that bed and he sees the dust and things, and then he also sees this big shrink ray, just as an example, that
right.
there's very everyday mundane things that are mixed in with this, like, wow, I can't believe this
Yeah,
type of things. Well, just for the sake of time, I'm going to go ahead and bring us back to this final quote here, that hopefully will kind of wrap us up. And again, if you didn't watch the first webinar, I definitely hope that you go back, because it's really impossible to jump toward this building on strengths before we've taken the time to notice and name the strengths that are already there. So Catherine Bomer says, let us look carefully and with generosity past what is missing and what is incorrect to the extraordinary beauty, freshness, and yes, the brilliance in children's writing. Believe that children are trying to make something, that they have intentions, purposes, and reasons for writing the way they do. So I really enjoyed looking again at this writing with you, Alice, and I think that that's a great just idea to leave our listeners with, is this idea of believing that children have intentions and purposes and reading and
absolutely.
reasons for their writing.
Absolutely.
Well, thanks.
Thank you.